King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at kingcomics.ca, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby. Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex, and once again, this is Big Baby Reviews. Today we're reviewing Frank Miller's Holy Terror, originally released September 2011, 10 years after the September 11th attack in New York City. Frank Miller lived in New York City when 9/11 happened, and his reaction to that was to kind of get this book ready, which originally was to be published by DC Comics as a Batman comic. He was kind of planning on mirroring the propaganda comics of the wartime effort during the 40s that some of the major American publishers were putting out, propaganda against the Nazis and the Japanese, obviously, at that time. So his goal was to do that, a more modern take on it, using, in this case, terrorism, but also, as you will see in the book, incorporating Muslims and the Muslim religion and Arabs kind of all together in one. And that's why this book is kind of somewhat controversial. Some had that view that this was, not just anti-terrorist, but anti-Muslim and anti-Arab. So Frank Miller was highly criticized that time. And that time in Frank Miller's history is a little murky. We don't know a lot about it, only that, after this book, he kind of disappeared for a while and then resurfaced 5 or 6 years later. And at that point, Frank looked a lot different. He looked a lot older. He didn't look in great shape, not going to cast aspersions there. It's none of our business if he doesn't want to talk about it. Clearly, he doesn't seem to want to talk about it. All that he's said, really, or that's been known about this period, whether true or not, or whether that was the only thing, is that Frank was drinking heavily. Okay, so I mean that's kind of an easy out, I find, when you are deemed controversial. That at that, one of the excuses you can give is I was drinking and I wasn't thinking straight and I was putting out strange material because I was an alcoholic or whatever at that point. I mean, maybe I'm not denying it, but I do feel like there was something else going on there. But yet I will be honest, that's none of my business. But again, a very murky period of Frank Miller's life, and again, which led also to the controversy with this book and with the creator at the time. My opinion on these kinds of things is, I can still analyze and enjoy work on different levels. So even if I don't necessarily agree with the philosophy that's presented in the book, I can still appreciate many other elements of it, and not just throw it all down the river, altogether. So there's aspects of this book I agree with, visually, graphically, when it comes to the philosophy and the ideas behind it, maybe not so much. But there's something to be said about work. I like work generally that's very visceral and distinctive. And this definitely fits that description to a T, 100%. Again, whether I agree with the philosophy that's kind of espoused or not, you can tell that the creator is, working from the gut, with lots of passion. Again, very viscerally. You see the work on the page, and you'll see, how he chooses to present his graphics while still being very Frank Miller, and recognizable as such. He's really kind of going nuts there. If he's saying he was an alcoholic and he was drinking a lot when he was producing this book, I could almost believe it, because some of the pages, like I said, not that it ruins it completely or anything like that, but you can get the sense that maybe he was a little drunk for certain of the applications on the board that we're going to see. Enough talking about that, though. Let's just take the time to crack this open and have a look. I think I've adjusted the camera as best as I can to get the widescreen format of this. So just bear with me for a few seconds. I think I measured this out pretty close to right. I may just have to adjust with the camera a little bit. And I guess that's probably as good as we're going to get it today, which isn't too bad. It fills the frame, but I think we're just cut off at the right part. All right, so these first few pages, this motif of nails, remember it's going to become important and used a lot in the comic. So yeah, the editors at DC decided, yeah, we're not going to do this as a Batman comic. So I mean, if you can imagine, as we move through it and look at the pages, um, you know, basically what Frank Miller did. There's a character in here who I'm pretty sure was meant to be Catwoman and has become kind of an analog Catwoman. So not her, but her. So in this case, I feel like most of this was drawn as Batman and Catwoman, and then Frank, all he had to do really was come back and just modify a few things with the white ink or the black ink. So either, if there were any kind of bat ears here, just black them out or white them out, depending on where the contrast is in the image. And when you see Catwoman, I think much of the same was done with her. And of course, I'm assuming the bat signal, or the bat symbol rather, was on his chest. It's a pretty easy task with some white medium just to get rid of that. But these pages here already kind of give you a preview of the aesthetic of the book. And, it's Frank Miller, kind of doing Sin City, but with much messier inks and textures and much, crazier and wilder application of white on top of that. There's some dripping. I think he's using toothbrush in some parts. We'll talk about that as we move ahead. A lot of splatter. I really like splatter, so I'm very satisfied with the splatter in this book. But as I said, very visceral work, very physical work. You can feel him throwing stuff at the page. So it starts with this quote: "If you meet the infidel, kill the infidel," quoted to Muhammad. So from what I gather, this is a quote from the Quran. I would argue you can grab the Bible and probably find similar quotes as well. So, taken out of context, possibly, and again, interpreting, scripture and philosophy and stuff like that. It's really down to how you see it. If you meet the infidel, kill the infidel could be a very kind of, symbolic way of saying kill him with kindness and convert him to your religion, or try to. That could be, a way to interpret this. Kill doesn't have to be literal, right? So that's just one way of seeing it. Not saying it's my way, but just to show you how words can be interpreted and very often misinterpreted. So the first kind of official page of the story is just a bunch of splatter. Some, like I said, I believe a brush or a toothbrush of some sort. I'm going to try and guess at this stuff, right? So if you can imagine that underneath all the splatter and white, you probably have a fairly typical high contrast Sin City like image, right? With lots of big black bold shapes, black sky, and he uses the white here for the structure of the buildings and the black just to define some little bit of detail on the building. Once that's done, and he's done it kind of his traditional Sin City style, then he comes back and throws all this white splatter over it, and just that adds a kind of a physical or physicality aspect to the art, right? And he's probably just throwing that on the board. And Frank Miller's known to use huge boards now, and probably at this time too. So I don't want to imagine how big these originals are. So he's throwing paint at these pages when he's drawing them. But again, take out that splatter. It's very much Sin City, high contrast, Frank Miller. Just getting messier, He's coming back here with adding some white inside the glove here. We get what it is, but it's highly messy, super messy. Again, the strength in Frank Miller is his silhouettes and his composition. As long as what this book kind of proves is, as long as he gets those right, and you can tell what's going on with just those basic shapes, he can throw a ton of poop on top and splatter. I call it poop, but splatter and brushwork and stuff, and it's still clear and legible. Now he's going to push that to the extreme. There's some pages where I would argue that doesn't work quite as well. I think this page is highly effective, almost purely Sin City with just a bit of dripping here and there, which is cool, but that stark white really works. But again, this is his new style. He is trying to do something a little bit different than Sin City, right? Same kind of thing here. So first kind of clear shot of this character, who is what I call the Catwoman analog. So I imagine she had ears, and, as this book shifted from being a Batman book to a creator-owned Frank Miller book, all he had to do really was, paint out the ears. I tend to think that this costume was probably already, the design for Catwoman, just with the added ears. And just kind of a Frank Miller trope. He does this a lot. He'll just spot one color once in a while. So in this case, the soles of her shoes are red. Just kind of adds a bit of visual interest, attracts her eye, right? With black and white, monochrome usually works really well because, again, you know, that whatever color you're going to throw in there is going to catch the eye right away. Sometimes I'm tempted to think maybe some of this work could be digital, but I know Frank Miller is not known to work digitally at all. Still working on paper and stuff, so, you know, maybe it's just in the adjusting of the levels and stuff once the art was scanned that it's kind of thrown me off a bit. That's possible. I'm trying to find like repetitive drips, right? Drips are like the same. I don't think I'm finding any. You know, that's something that would, you know, occasionally you would see the same exact shape of drip if this was, you know, digitally added drip. Once again, the shoes highlighted. So, you know, this first part here is just kind of a classic, you know, Batman trope, Batman running after Catwoman, right? That's what we're looking at here. Just, you know, and I could believe too also that maybe when Frank originally did the pages, there was none of the splatter, right? Because it was meant to be more of a Batman comic. And once, you know, he knew DC wouldn't publish it and he would be doing it not on his own with Legendary, but just, you know, no editor, basically being able to do what he wanted. He just decided to, you know, again, go over the pages again, white out the whatever parts he needed to the ears, and then maybe add some splatter and just go kind of crazy, right? Like on these pages here. I don't know if these are thumbprints or, you know, he's using another tool here just to dirty up the page, right? He's really going crazy and making it grimy. You know, he's having fun. Maybe he is drunk. I don't know. So, as I said, I'm just going to go through this part quickly now because it is a classic kind of just Batman Catwoman chase, but that's going to turn into, you know, a Frank Miller superhero sex scene, right? Which he's very big on. It's one of his tropes. I will say this too. I do remember seeing this, like, unless this is some sort of you know, false memory that I'm misremembering or remembering wrong. I'm pretty sure I saw this when it was announced as Batman Holy Terror, and he still had like the bat ear here on the side, which obviously has disappeared now. So some Frank, you know, I've seen this shot in Dark Knight 2 or something similar to it, you know, with Superman and Wonder Woman. So here they are kind of plummeting down, and he puts the cuffs on her. You're busted. She starts punching the crap out of him. Gets free. They're still fighting. Boots to the face. You know, the red motif. The splatter's getting more and more. He punches her back. And just seems like that's turned her on. And in typical Frank Miller fashion, again, one of his biggest tropes, the superhero sex scene. So here they are kissing passionately on the rooftop, falling down. Bit more fighting. And of course, superhero sex. Forgetting about that for a while, I love all of this stuff here. These 2 pages here, just the architecture, the weird textures. I don't know exactly what he used here. You know, to smear the sky here. Very industrial kind of background, I guess. You know, same thing here. I love kind of the structure, the machinery here. Are they at the port or something? You know, I don't know exactly. Looks great. I think this looks super cool. Both these pages here. I love architecture generally in comics, and these are just really nice stark examples of it, and the way he's doing it, interpreting it, the splatter, the dust, the textures he's using, love it. Even this, you know, like such a weird looking building, but you get it. It's made of glass, probably some sort of dome. You know, here in Montreal we have the huge dome, Expo 67 dome, which is kind of has the structure here. So this seems familiar to me. It works. Very cool. This tower here, I just love both these pages. And as they're going at it, I guess, a bomb goes off. And it's what you call a dirty bomb, because inside are pieces generally of metal or shrapnel, so that when it explodes, it doesn't just explode, but it also throws sharp objects far distances at high speed to hurt and maim people. So in this case, you know, nails. So this is a nail bomb. And nails are flying everywhere. So that's the motif I was telling you about. So this is where, you know, this stops being a superhero story, Catwoman chase, superhero sex scene. You know, we've hit the Batman trope, we hit the Frank Miller trope. Now here's the terrorist attack, right? And of course, you know, having survived, he wasn't at the towers, but having lived through September 11th in New York, you know, he saw the dust and things like that. So I think he's interpreting that and adding a lot of that into this comic for the terrorist attack, right? Like, you know, here the stark whiteness here, you know, maybe because of the dust. We've gone from black skies to white, completely white skies, you know. So now we see, I guess, what happened. We have a young exchange student, humanities major. All right, and what's implied here, again, using the monochrome, I would call this, I guess, magenta, right here, just because it's a monochrome touch, her lips here. So she basically is a Muslim, and this is her first time taking alcohol just before, basically, she blows herself up. She is the suicide bomber, right? Quite a crowd. Yeah, this place is always packed. There's something under your coat. What is it? Paradise. So he's kind of felt the bomb, I guess. And then, you know, the bomb goes off again, mirroring the moment from earlier with the Catwoman analog. And the Batman analog, who we'll learn, if we haven't read it yet, we'll learn his name is the Fixer. So, you know, just the kind of faces in the crowd you see that, you know, died from this terrorist attack. So now we're back with, you know, the Catwoman analog and the Fixer. We see the dust now pretty clearly. So again, he's using all those textures and stuff for the chaos, the dirty grit, you know. Definitely mirroring 9/11 here and the dust clouds that we saw. Getting caught up in that. And then there's another bomb. So again, I think symbolically he's representing the two planes hitting the Twin Towers. So the first nail bomb is the first plane, and this seems to be a razor blade bomb. He's chosen now a different motif, so that would be the second plane. So here he drops her. Again, kind of hard to decipher here what exactly is going on. He catches her somehow. But that's one of those images where it's a little hard to see. This one's clear enough. Once again, razor blades flying everywhere. You get a sense of the explosion, the momentum, the impact, you know. And here you get kind of a, I would say, a shot that's very reminiscent of what was left over when the towers fell down. And you just kind of have mounds of building left over and dust clouds rising. So he says, the bastards, how many of my neighbors have they murdered, right? So this is the page that kind of leads me to think that maybe there's some Photoshop earlier on with the splatter, the white splatter and stuff. I could be wrong on that, but definitely this here is a Photoshop effect. So obviously the fading out of these characters is to signify their death. At least that's what I feel it is. And we get one last kind of slight face here, and it all goes white. And the panels get smaller, same, and get even smaller. You know, kind of ballsy to have a whole page here with no actual drawing, just panels. The only thing I would say is what kind of ruins the effect is, I don't know if you guys can see this here, it's not so bad. Once you turn the page here, you can kind of see, you know, the faces on this side through the paper. If the paper had been a bit thicker, we wouldn't see that. And it just, you know, kills the effect a little bit. Like here, when we look, even though these are just empty panels, we can kind of see already what's printed on the other side, right? If you see that face there, we can already kind of see it here. It's not the end of the world. Like, I get it and I know how this works, but it's just a small detail that I think if the paper had been a little bit thicker, we would have avoided that and not seen that, and the effect would have been a little stronger. It's a minor gripe though. You know, this is kind of mirroring, I guess, everyone's reaction to you know, the planes hitting the towers on September 11th and the towers falling. Here, you know, just kind of a close-up massive destruction. I'm not quite sure. There's a car here and a shoe here, so I'm not sure if this is like the top of a building and this is down by the ground. I think there's a car here. Yeah. So this is one of those images where I'm not quite sure if I'm getting everything I'm supposed to. There's just so much texture work and splatter and you know, this kind of toothbrushy dry brush effect that I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at here. I'm gonna assume it's meant to be just a mound of destruction here with what I think is a shoe up close. You know, and this is a page because it's just two kind of hero figures, hero in quotes. You know, even though you're missing parts of his top of his head here and it's very messy and lots of texture, this definitely works. And then you get to a page like this where all of a sudden it's toned down, right? You still get some splatter effects, you get a bit here, but you kind of get more of a basic Sin City-esque kind of drawing, and I would even say even more simplified down, even more than Sin City stuff. Maybe a bit too much on this page, you know what I mean, compared to here, like to bring it down to this stark level of non-detail. I do think the composition though is awesome, super simple. It's a quick page to draw if you're thinking artist terms. So this is kind of the police character, police officer character. Oh, what happened here? Oh, well, that's not good. Oh, great. Well, you're discovering this in real time with me. So this is kind of the Commissioner Gordon type character. So in this case, I imagine his hair was light and, you know, Frank Miller just had to go in and darken it, just like his mustache. Dan Donegal, I always like these names Frank Miller comes up with. They're super kind of stereotypical. And then we get a shot of a terrorist here. And as you saw just a little bit earlier, these two pages, for some reason, this is, you know, my second edition that I have. My other one's tucked away in a box. I don't think I'd ever open this one, so, you know, that's a nasty surprise. Unfortunate, but what are you going to do? So very weird here. This drawing, I have no idea, you know, why all of a sudden the level of drawing goes down like this. It looks like something someone would do with a mouse on paint, you know, back in the day. Very odd to me choice, but all right. All these other caricatures though are pretty good. So we've got, you know, back in the day, George Bush, Michael Moore. I think that's Dick Cheney. Not 100% sure who all these characters are, right? We've got helicopters. We got some, I guess, terrorist, Condoleezza Rice. Not quite sure what's going on here. I guess it's somewhat of a commentary on the media. Our politicians, you know, who's involved, who's making the decisions, who's doing what, who's trying to do something. I'm not quite sure what he's exactly trying to say here. This to me is reminiscent of Sin City, right? When Marv cuts the head off of Kevin. So I don't know if this is some leftover art from that or photo reference. But I guess he's implying, you know, politicians and, you know, Arab politicians and terrorist leaders leading to death. That's what I can surmise. All right, so we got more shots of, you know, our Batman Catwoman analog jumping across rooftops, you know. I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly because it's a little bit more of the same of what we've seen. So they're making their way towards, you know, where they think the explosion happened, and you know, seeing if they can do something, I guess, intervene and stop the terrorists. So this is where, you know, you can see some of the controversial aspects. Triumph, praise Allah, oh hell. So, you know, really implying that, you know, the terrorists are fundamentalists, Islamists, Muslims, you know, kind of putting them all in the same boat is what it seems Frank Miller's doing here. Maybe he's not, but it's certainly the impression that's given. And in this case, you know, obviously the fixer is blowing them all away. The Catwoman character, she's got claws, so she's using those. And then, you know, in around here, the art style starts to change. No more splatter, right? It gets simplified. Or is this just basically the art before the splatter? I don't know, because it seems to have inversed, where what was black is now white and what was white is now black generally, right? So he's kind of flipped the contrast on us. For what reason, I'm not quite sure, but the splatter has disappeared and I kind of miss it. Although, overall, this is probably a lot easier to read, for sure. Simpler and clearer. But that simpler part too is maybe what's bugging me a little bit here. It really does feel a little bit rushed compared to the other stuff. The other stuff was more energetic, more visceral. This feels a little bit more like cartooning. So it gets a little odd. You know, I'm not going to go through every little bit of this book. You know, the artistic merit is mostly what I'm looking at. And again, the visceral nature of the artwork, the techniques used, you know, the physicality of it. So now we're back to stark, you know, black. I do think the way he does the jets in the air here is super effective. Fun that it's a silhouette, so pretty easy. I don't want to say easy, but simpler to nail and get the angles and stuff, and not have to worry about every little detail. Very geometric, very what's the word I'm looking for? It escapes me right now. Anyways, we'll move on. Very symmetrical, right? That's what I was looking for. So, of course, the terrorist jets in this case shooting down what is not Lady Liberty, but an analog of that as well. You know, the symbol of liberty in America. You know, destroying it, shooting it down. I assume here that it's falling in the water. Again, one of those pages where I get the boat, I get the water. I'm just not quite sure here. If I turn my head, it becomes a little bit clearer and you can see, you know, the side of her head turned. But when you just look at it like this, it's not quite so obvious. Maybe just a little less kind of line work here would have helped clear that up a bit. So we have people's reactions to it, right? The kind of, you know, militant patriotic fervor you usually get after an event like that, as we saw after September 11th. Now we got the police and the military involved, obviously. This always kind of was odd to me. You know, we've got these two kind of assassin ladies, and then we've got this man with like the Star of David on his face, so he's some weird undercover Jewish agent. I mean, again, that's what I take from this because I don't know for sure. There is a kind of a, even to this, even though it's, you know, a book about terrorism, you know, kind of as Frank Miller described, a piece of propaganda. There's a kind of a fever dream, you know, surrealist feeling to it all, right? I mean, you know, Frank Miller's comics already kind of deal sometimes in obviously not realism, but, you know, comic book realism. But this brings it to another level. You know, the narrative is not as clear cut, not as obvious, and I like that. I like when things are just not so clear cut and cookie cutter and easy to understand, or when the characters are telling us exactly how they feel all the time. You know, that's not necessarily my bag. So I do appreciate that aspect of it here in this book. Some more awesome examples of silhouettes here. You know, like this stuff here, is that, I guess that's paint, right? Just kind of doing the water splashing on the side of the docks or something, right? On the side of the boat. I was almost thinking, is that a panel and is this another panel? But I think it's one big panel. Could work as both. Frank Miller, always really good with the silhouettes. And any chance he gets, not forgetting to bring back, you know, the red soles of her shoes. So this is an odd thing as well. You know, the image of a snail here. Not exactly sure what kind of symbolism he's going for. You know, does he find that, you know, politically America is not reacting fast enough to the terrorist attack or something? Is that what he's trying to say? I don't know. That's just a guess. I'm not saying, you know, that's what it is and I agree with it. That's just one hypothesis. Not quite sure what this means here. But I, you know, tend to guess that it means something, at least to Frank Miller. So here she is sneaking in, dressed as, you know, a fundamentalist Muslim woman would, I assume. And I don't know for sure exactly. I don't know much about that religion or that part of the world, honestly. you know, but I guess that's what Frank Miller's assuming here. And now the art changes again. You know, still high contrast, but lots more like a Linclair style, like almost like Frank Miller did in Electra. Is it Electra Lives Again? I believe so. So similar to that style, you know, in which he was doing a lot of, you know, interesting architecture and stuff. So he's kind of revisiting that here, I feel like. Always thought this very clever panel here, right? A clever way to deal with stairs. Stairs are not fun to draw from any angle. So there's kind of a bit of a flattening here, but which totally works and clearly gives us a sense that they're moving down. Some more great silhouettes, right? You can read the positions of all the characters. You know, it's important. All these little curves and stuff indicate something. The gun, you know, some sort of pouch on his belt. The fact that he's wearing, you know, some sort of scarf over his face, right? You can tell all those things just in the silhouette if you've done it effectively, right? Some of this, I gotta say, just a little bit reminds me of some of the look of the Holy Mountain. Some of the scenes with some of the interior architecture in that movie, the Jodorowsky movie. If you haven't seen that, the Holy Mountain, I definitely recommend it. Weird, kind of surrealist, psychedelic 70s movie. Very fun. Another movie in the narrative that doesn't just give you everything that, you know, you kind of have to guess at or think about, you know, if you're into that kind of thing. Definitely check out the Holy Mountain. All right, so she's finally, you know, moved to move. Let me say that again. She's brought to action, okay, and she's kicking this guy in the face here, Conch. So she's making her move. So much for the easy part. And here, all of a sudden, I'm not quite sure, but everything gets bathed in magenta, and there are weird underwater man-eating fish flying around. Again, like the snail, I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to symbolize. She's eventually caught and tied up, and, you know, our master villain here, you know, gives her the spiel about, you know, why the terrorist attack and, you know, the infidels, all that stuff. And here's where we get some nice, stark kind of Frank Miller stuff. Boom, boom, boom. So we're not quite sure what happened here, but that's okay, because we kind of figured out here when their heads explode, right? They've been shot, so you have to assume that he's been shot in the arm here, and whatever part of his arm was here is just kind of, you know, disintegrated almost. And here we got the fixer coming in with, I'm not quite sure why his face here, again, is that monochrome motif that Frank Miller likes so much. There's got to be a reason. I guess we'll find out later. Have it here again, right? So he's here to save the day, kill all the terrorists, get the girl out of trouble. This is a pretty cool pinup here. It's got a huge Liefeld gun. Some weird kind of art on the wall here, which I think is great. That's, you know, the only thing telling us there's a wall there is this line and this artwork, but it works. It's really cool. It's really graphic, right? You can see the kind of stairs coming down here. Very, very graphic, very cool here. Great composition. Here's one of those silhouette shots. He's added the monochrome, the red. A little hard to read. I mean, we know from before that big ball with the wires that were connected to it, so something's happened there and exploded, but these silhouettes, I would say, are not as great as what we had before. Or maybe because of the red, for some reason, it's not as cool as when it's stark black and white. It's a weird choice, once again, but, you know, far be it for me to judge. So I guess what the fixer character had on his face was some sort of, you know, mask to help protect from the dust, right? It's becoming a little more obvious here when we see the Catwoman character wearing it. So 6 weeks later, we get a repeat of these nails flying everywhere and realize that it is, once again, Dan Donegal, the you know, Commissioner Gordon analog, waking up from a nightmare from that day in that terrorist attack, right? So it ends with him saying, "No wonder we call it terror," right? And here, respectfully dedicated to Theo Van Gogh, 1957-2004, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Theo Van Gogh was killed by some Muslim, not terrorists, but fundamentalists. He had said something, you know, criticizing, I think, the Muslim religion. I'm not quite sure on the details. And he was killed. So this is kind of the image of Frank Miller that we know before this book comes out, right? As this book comes out, the controversy rises and we don't hear from him from a few years. So this is kind of, you know, what we saw. And as I said, you know, 5-6 years later, once he comes out of that kind of, you know, self-imposed exile, he looks very different, you know, and he's talked about the alcohol, but, you know, I think other health issues are involved. Again, not my business if he's not willing to talk about it. So this is our image of Frank Miller before this, unspoiled, right? I'll read it. Frank Miller is one of the seminal creative talents who sparked today's onslaught of motion pictures featuring comic book characters and concepts. I would agree with that. He single-handedly redefined the presentation of comic book characters in heroic fiction with his granddaddy of graphic novels, The Dark Knight Returns, sure, and his other graphic novels turned box office hits included 300 and Sin City, the film version of which Miller co-directed with Robert Rodriguez, proving that success does not always come wrapped in spandex. Miller also created Ronin. I really like Ronin. It's a great book. And wrote Batman Year One. Awesome book as well with David Mazzucchelli. Batman, The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Mitigated, another controversial book. I do still kind of like it, but it's an odd one for sure. And even odder, All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder, which I enjoyed for all the wrong reasons, all for DC Comics. And The Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot, Hardboiled, and Martha Washington at Dark Horse Comics. All good stuff with Rusty and Hardboiled is with Jeff Darrow, and Martha Washington with Dave Gibbons. The motion picture The Spirit marked Miller's solo feature film directorial debut. Yeah, didn't do so well. I don't know if that came out around this time or a little bit before. I guess, you know, the sheen hadn't worn off Frank Miller quite yet. But in the eyes of most of the comic book buying public, this book kind of, you know, cemented that. And Frank Miller went away for a few years after this book. So there you have it. Probably the most controversial Frank Miller book. But again, as I said, reviewing it, reading this book does not mean you condone any idea that is in here. What I will say is that, you know, throughout history, it's been shown that, you know, ideas change and allies change. So, you know, our enemy one day is our friend the next. So, you know, for some reason, it's seen as okay to criticize those people for a certain amount of time. And then all of a sudden things change. And now it's probably the worst thing you can do. Not saying any of that is great, one side or the other. That just seems to be the nature of history and shifting alliances amongst, you know, politicians, governments, countries, and etc. So, you know, we're not all going to solve it. I'm not going to solve it. And Frank Miller here, again, whether I agree or not with the viewpoint, I appreciate the effort and the visceral kind of nature of the work that he did on this book. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if that's possible. And I wish you all a great day. Thank you very much.